only one place to start, and that is with the Premier League's top two. Liverpool went 5 points clear of Manchester City after the champions lost again, this time at Brighton. It is Pep Guardiola's worst ever spell as a manager, suffering a fourth straight defeat, while City themselves haven't had this bad a run since Stuart Pearce was back in charge way back in 2006, if you can remember that far back. Welcome along to you both. Good to see you. Look, Darren, it is headlines because it's so rare to see Pep and his team struggle, isn't it? They do have a lack of players due to injuries. Is that the nub of the problem, do you feel?
Yes, and part of it is also the loss of Rodri. He is the Ballon d'Or winner. He is the best midfielder in the world. Had he been playing in these 4 games that they've lost to Brighton, Bournemouth, Sporting, Tottenham, none of those teams would have had the run of the midfield as they have done. He's got leadership, he's got goals in him, he's got pass distribution, he is a protector of the back four. There is so much to like about him, and had he been playing, they'd have been able to build on this wonderful goal, 13th of the season for Erling Haaland, who is doing what he does best. In fact, he's doing his part, his job. But as far as the midfield is concerned, just look at this, the way that Brighton are able to create chances, bypass the midfield, get the ammunition in for players to jump on the mistakes in that back line and do that. And I think Dharmesh would agree. I know you're very much of the opinion that with Rodri coming back at some stage during the season, they could maybe turn it around. Without him for the entirety of the campaign, that might be it for them.
It certainly feels that way. No Rodri, no party, it feels like at the moment. I know we always talk about Manchester City always coming good after the new year gets underway. This just feels a little bit different. I was talking to a friend and colleague before the show, Vic, and I'm going to shamelessly steal one of his phrases here. They seem to be failing the eye test. Yes, in the first half, they dominating teams. They did that against Sporting. They did that against Brighton again yesterday. They only had 1 goal to show for it. And then come the second half, everything seems to change. And I think whether Pep Guardiola will publicly say it or not, whether he's overly concerned about their form at the moment, from what I can see, privately he must be. Because with Rodri not coming back before the end of the season, Kevin De Bruyne just feeling his way back in as well. The other issue that they've had is Ruben Diaz. He's missed the last 3 defeats. He came off at half-time, I think, in the League Cup defeat against Tottenham. And he's been missing from their defence in the last 3 games. And if you look at the central defensive partnership they had yesterday, I think opposing teams will look at that and think we've got a chance, a realistic chance of really causing trouble to Manchester City here.
Yeah, I mean, what have the papers said about this sort of slump, shall we call it?
Yeah, it's important to get to the papers quite quickly, actually, because they do sum up the situation very well. This is a Sunday People back page. Pep's lost it. The appropriate picture, head in hands, that we saw a lot of that yesterday. The graphic with the L's tells a story as well, gives us that kind of special sauce, if you like, that makes the Premier League so compelling because they've come back from difficulty before. But I want you to look at the subdeck on the top left-hand side. Guardiola vowing to fight after losing the 4th game in a row for the first time ever. Here's another stat for you as well. It's only the 2nd time in 92 games that City have lost after scoring the first goal. They'd won 78 of the
That's
other
quite telling,
91.
isn't it? We'll talk about that in a minute, just about the second half of games for Manchester City at the moment.
Yeah, because yesterday, Kelly, Steph and Jamie, they were talking about there being a way back for Brighton at half-time. They were refusing to write the game off as a fait accompli. And they were absolutely right, because Brighton have shown before, let's not kid ourselves, that they can come back from adversity, because in the game against Tottenham, they were 2 goals down and they came back to win. I think a big part of yesterday was, and I referenced this before, Haaland did his bit, but how many other players do theirs? Have a look at this in the Sunday Mirror, because it talks all about the fact that Erling Haaland is scoring his goals. But look at the subdeck again there. Foden and co need to step up and start scoring Haaland just can't keep doing it alone. Now, to be fair, this is Ryan Taylor's piece in the Sunday Mirror. And to be fair to Foden, listen, double player of the year, is an outstanding player. We know how good he is. And the management of him has been very careful to make sure that he can come in at the right time, but get the rest that he needs with the fixture list so unforgiving. But I think as far as Haaland is concerned, he's carried this team on his back. 52 goals in his first season. He won the Golden Boot last season, leading scorer. He's already out on his own as a leading scorer this season. Now, if they're going to get out of this slump, he needs help. He needs other players to score goals. I was looking ahead of the show, Vic and Darms, at the numbers. There is no other City player in the top 20 scorers of the Premier League so far. That's incredible.
Yeah, it tells its own story. And in terms of that second half, you know, Jamie Redknapp was saying after the game that it's the worst, one of the worst halves he's ever seen from a Pep Guardiola side. Would you agree with that?
I mean, it wasn't great, but, I mean, we've been talking about Manchester City the whole time. You've got to give credit to the previous night, Ruben Amorim and Sporting Lisbon for their second half performance, and Brighton for their second half performance.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned before, they've got a bit of history with fighting back when they've been in adversity of Brighton. And Fabian Hurtzler has shown he has got the players and he's got the tactical nous to be able to change things at particularly half-time in the second half.
Not afraid
as well,
to, is he?
To be able to spark a turnaround that we saw yesterday. But it was a mix of both. It was Brighton's brilliance and their recovery powers and how far off City seemed to fall. That first goal that Brighton scored, I mean, have you seen anything like that from City? There was like 5 City players round there. They're all falling on the floor. And then João Pedro went, oh, just nip in here and I'll just stick it in there.
For me, is it a little bit of a sign? Because we all know Pep really, really well. And, you know, I've sat down and discussed lots of things with him, and he's a great chatter about everything. So, you know, maybe he was just saying, look, this is how I felt. And obviously, Van Hecke was involved with a bit of a scuffle with Haaland. So was he referring to that? They both held onto one another's shirts. It looked pretty 50-50 from where I was looking. So, you know, maybe it's just... But is it a little bit of Pep actually showing his frustration after a game where his team perhaps should have won and they didn't?
Yes and no. I mean, you looked at the Brighton game, you look at the Sporting game as well. We're talking about these second halves. There could have been a moot point in both games because City dominated both of those first halves and only had one goal to show for it. So it could have been a completely different rhetoric that we're talking about, a narrative that we're talking about with Pep Guardiola and Manchester City just now. But is he losing his cool? He's been here before. And I know I'm saying that, you know, this feels different. Pep Guardiola will probably look at it in another way and say, let's just calm down. On the flip side, you could actually say, some will say, it's a 5-point gap. Look how big the gap is. Whereas Pep Guardiola could say, look at all the injuries we've had, and it's only a 5-point gap.
Well, that's what he has said. He has said, you know, look, he's rattled through all of the injuries with the various broadcast media that he's spoken to and print media since yesterday. And we debated this when we were having a coffee earlier. We've seen before when the odds have been against them. I remember when they got smashed up 5-2 by Leicester and Guardiola hadn't signed his contract at that stage. It was in the autumn and there were all sorts of storm clouds around City, and the belief that not just that they couldn't get back into it, but that he couldn't rebuild City. They'd had their success, and could he do it? And he loves it when he gets questioned because he has to come up with the answers. And actually, that's the mark of a supreme manager. That's why we give him the credit and the respect he deserves, because he's done it time and again. And you can, listen, we can talk about the money, and we know what 115 charges, all that sort of thing. But we've all seen, everybody watching, everybody has seen in football history, there have been clubs and managers with huge amounts of money who have not been able to get, as Jamie was saying yesterday with Kelly, get millionaire players to run, to fight, to have the consistency, to come back the season after they've had success and turn up with the right attitude. And that's what he does time and again. That's why I wouldn't write him off. We've seen the stats say that at least every team that's won the Premier League, there've been almost like a 7-point gap.
Yes, definitely
at some
7.
stage of the
They've
season.
come back from 7 behind before.
5 points is nothing for these guys.
No.
Last week, you know, he said he only had 13 players.
I
but they're the
agree with
Avengers, you know, they can come back.
I agree with you. The reason I feel this is different, and an obvious and a clear thing to say is Rodri. They haven't had to do this without Rodri before. So can they cope without the Ballon d'Or win? He's just won the Ballon d'Or.
What happens if they
He's
go
out
out and
for
they
the
buy
season.
Zubimendi in January?
So you're buying a player, yes, got great pedigree, just say they do buy him, won't have had a pre-season under Manchester City. How long does a January signing take to fit into a style of play? And not only a style of play, Pep Guardiola and Manchester City's style of play. Who knows? Look, you could be absolutely right. Zubimendi, if they do go out and try and buy Zubimendi and he comes in and it's a seamless transition from Rodri to Zubimendi and they win the league with 3 games to spare, then I will sit here and say, Darren, you were right. It just feels very different this time because you can see the vulnerabilities that City have had so far this season because Rodri isn't there.
You know what's interesting, Vic? The next couple of games, because these 4 defeats have all been away from home. Next couple of games are going to be interesting because they are at the Etihad Stadium where they're undefeated. We're almost, a year to the day since they were beaten at home by Brentford. If they start to lose at home, then it's time to worry.
Just in terms of Pep, he often does this, doesn't he? He goes on an international break, he sort of sorts out his future. We've seen this before. He said on Friday he's staying another year, or at least he said he's not going this year. Would this, and I know it's 4 games, but it's Manchester City. Would this in any way play anything into his future? Would he sit back and think, do you know what? Like he said last night, hang on, 6 out of 7 isn't bad. Another team, perhaps have a chance at winning the title. He's telling everyone, listen, I've done this and I've done this several times before. Would that be a moment where he says, actually, do you know what? I'm done. We can't see that side of Pep, can we?
No, I don't, because he doesn't just produce footballers with the right attitude, but he produces footballers who are very good at shutting out the noise. They're leaders, they're winners, they're people who go out there, and if you're going to beat them, you're going to have to be carried out on your shield. These 4 defeats, there's not... OK, the Sporting one's been relatively comfortable for them, but even in that match, they had chances coming out of their ears in the first half. But the others... they've really had to fight. Bournemouth, City were battering them at the end. Brighton, they had to fight for that yesterday. And yes, ultimately the scoreline does reflect negatively on City. But I think as far as the attitude is concerned, there's nothing wrong, I don't think, with the players' attitudes. What's quite interesting, actually, Kyle Walker in the 2nd edition, because obviously the game was so late yesterday, so the first editions of the newspapers had the bare results and the initial quotes to what we call flash quotes to TV. And then the 2nd edition, which is out a few hours later, allows the journalists to go and get reaction from the players and feed that back to their respective desks, and they can get those into the later editions of the newspapers. And Walker in the 2nd edition of the Telegraph talks about, we've got to put our cigars away. Our attitude has to be right going into this difficult period for us, possibly season defining. And it reflects, what Guardiola's been saying is, this is a tough moment, but I'm not under pressure, I'm not walking away, I'm ready to fight. And that's what the players are ready to do as well.